Welcome, welcome. It's Friday, and that means it's time for MSP Confidential. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And today I get the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Antwine Jackson. How are you, man? Out of
Doing
the
well.
Raleigh Durham area, business called Anytech. So good to have you on the stream, man. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
We recently hooked up at Kaseya Connect Global in Las Vegas, and it's so funny because I had Kevin Damkani on back in February, and it's customary for me to after I send a thank you email, all that. Hey, who do you think would be a good guest on the live stream? And so Kevin actually said you'd be a pretty awesome guest, and so I remember we emailed back and forth. So it's good to have you. Thanks for coming. I kind of I love hearing a bit of the backstory that MSPs have because, like it happened for me, I was a bit of an accidental business owner. And so I was curious to know how you got your start in technology, what sort of sparked that little flame, and what led you to, a few years into this madness that we call MSP.
Yeah, so man, we go back in the time machine, I guess. Um, the first party love affair I started with technology was actually due to my father, Clinton Jackson. So my dad's 83 years old today, was a sergeant major in the U.S. Army. So my dad grew up, in the 40s and 50s, really kind of seeing the dawn of technology, the evolution of technology is just on so many levels and scale. But one of the things that he really didn't have a good background in was some of the mechanical things behind the tech, right? So when he was in the army, he had a staff that worked for him, and they'd always use these excuses not to get things done. Oh, the computer's messed up top, or this is going on top. So finally, my dad was like, "Look, we're not being productive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in at night. I'm going to try to teach myself some of this technology I'm not comfortable with. And if I break something, well, I have a staff and a team and US taxpayer dollars that'll probably pay for getting that fixed, right?" So he brought me along with him when I was young. I was probably 8 years old. And that's kind of when the dawn started. My dad always kind of taught me, look, the one thing you don't ever want to be is ignorant to technology, because I believe this is the future. And sure enough, here we are. And that was probably the first taste, I got of it. And then, we fast forward. As I got a little older, there was a really cool company called Software Exchange. They were like the blockbuster video of computer software. So back then, before all the piracy laws really started to kind of take effect, this company would allow you to rent software on CDs or floppy disks, and you could take it home,
Rent.
install it for 3 days, and use it. So fast forward, at some point, it almost became daycare for me, because my parents would drop me off there during the summer, pick me up at the end, and I'd learn so much from so many great technologists. Well, fun story was during the Microsoft Office 97 and Windows 95 and Windows 98 era, these guys were actually pirating the software. So fun in summer, I remember being there, I think I was like 10 years old, and the SBI came because these guys were pirating these copies of Microsoft 90, Windows Office 97. So you can only imagine how very upset my mother, Dorothy, was at my father for dropping me off at this place that they were pirating software. And then, you fast forward to college. I kind of stayed in tech behind that. And then the real kickoff for Initech, and what really led to the dawn of that, was in college. I had a really good friend who was about 4 or 5 years older than me. He started an MSP, said, "Come work with me." And I got a chance to learn from him, understand the business side of technology and IT. And then, he wasn't the greatest, business owner. So didn't do a good job at, maintaining expenses and really being profitable. So I went about 4 months without a paycheck. And my girlfriend at the time, wife and mother of my children today, was kind of like, look, if I'm going to have to support you on my nursing salary, you need to be chasing your own dream and not someone else's. And honestly, that's what forced me to become an MSP. And I spent the first year, believe it or not, because I have a technology background. I have no business background or experience. I don't understand the MSP business, but I spent the first year going to conferences. Literally, before I made my first dollar, I went to conferences because I needed to learn. I needed to understand what the industry was about. I needed to understand what my peers were talking about. And I began networking with some of the greatest MSPs. Great friend of mine, Kevin's one of those people who really helped me along my journey and gave me an opportunity to grow and to learn and challenge myself.
That's incredible. So, because you know, you went for college to college for sociology, which is kind of a bit of a degree of separation from technology, you know, or you know, the MSP business. But you kind of went straight into working for your buddy at his company.
Yeah.
Did you actually ever get to practice, you know, in the
It's
sociology?
so funny because, at one point I thought that I wanted to practice law, right? And, I was thinking, okay, what could give me some perspective on the world, right? If I ever decide to go to law school. And, in my prime, I was pretty charismatic. I mean, I was prom king. I always like to plug that in there, right? That I'm a very charismatic, cool person when I'm really not. But, my affinity for tech kind of always existed, but I never thought it would be a career.
Mm,
But, it's really cool because that sociology background really makes me think of people, social trends, and for me, it's really helped me a lot because I do feel like I'm a very big people person, and not very introverted in a lot of ways. So like, it's really helped me with client relationships. I mean, even building my relationship with other people in the channel. You know.
yeah, no, for sure. I think it came off like even when you and I were chatting, there's like an immediate obvious like ease of conversation, or it's hard like to like maintain a conversation or hold a conversation. And I think the same is true when we deal with our clients. You know, those awkward silences, you know, people tell you let the client talk, don't jump in, but many of us sort of in those early days are like jumping right in because we you
Yep.
know 2 seconds of awkward silence and we got to deal with something, or we start, you know, over explaining stuff. So maybe talk to me a little bit through a bit of that client relationship stuff, because I don't know that we know that that's what we're doing early on in the career stage, right? You kind of figure that you just, oh, this actually was really important in hindsight that I was able to build relationships with clients. But you know, when did it
Oh
become
yeah.
sort of a critical, you know, cornerstone of the business for you in terms of thinking, you know, how important the relationships are and so on?
So let me tell you, like, client relationships are, I mean, it's essential, right? It's the foundation of your business. It's the gas that makes the business go financially, at least, right? And I think for us, or at least for me, it's always been making a connection, right? And you have to make it organic. You have to make it real.
Mm,
And one of the things that I always try to do is I try to be salesy without being salesy, right? So identifying the needs and problems, yes, that's surface level things, but developing things like empathy, right? Truly putting yourself in that customer's shoes. And then more importantly, not every customer is going to be a customer, right? They could be a customer down the line. They could be a relationship down the corner, or they could be a good referral relationship. So for me, I try to
mm,
make every relationship meaningful. So, like when I grew up, I didn't grow up a ton of money. My currency was social currency. That was how I got to where I got to get to. That's how I got the opportunities I've had in life. And I truly believe that and I truly value that. And I think when you're dealing with a customer, it is building and forging a relationship, right? When a customer leaves us, and we have customers that churn and, we part ways in a good way a lot of times. And it's not that they're leaving Initech, they're leaving Antwine. That's how they feel, right? And it's one of the hardest conversations and decisions. Like we had a client that churned, and it was because of financial reasons. They found a provider that was less expensive, and that's going to happen in this business. But at the end of the day, you still are a professional. You still
yeah.
maintain good relationships because that's what's the most important piece of it. And I remember this client like called me and said, "Hey man, this is like one of the hardest conversations I ever had." And I'm like, "It's totally cool. It's fine. That's you have to value the relationship more than the money." And I think if you do that and you really build on those relationships, and we have to be genuine, right? You have to care. You have to
Mm.
remember things. It can take you to the moon.
I believe that. A few weeks ago, I sat down with Chris Do, who's a very popular YouTuber and creative, who talks a lot about, you know, selling without being salesy, and we specifically hit on that topic. And one of the things I loved how he described it was, imagine that you're trying to convince your parents to do something that you know they need to do. Would you go like off the chart salesy with your parents? No, you try to like reach them through a genuine connection, through empathy. And so the way he positioned was so interesting, because it's like you have to get your customers to think of you the way your parents think of you. That sort of unequivocal trust for the thing that you're recommending, because you've proven that you've earned the trust from the customer. So I too I also agree that's so important. But I also get it's not always natural for some people to have a bit of that, social skill. And sometimes it takes years to come out of the shell. And so in those first few years of just sort of hitting your head against the walls, trying to create a relationship, it can be tough. And so, what would you say for somebody that maybe has difficulty coming out of their shell a bit?
Yeah.
Uh, what would you suggest they think about doing in terms of, creating a relationship with clients when it's a little bit harder
Yeah.
for them?
So, and trust me, like I employ a lot of people that are very introverted. My wife is introverted in a lot of ways, but even people that are, that have a tough time, just kind of putting themselves out there, you know, you have to start small, right? And I think for me, it's all about like level of comfort. So for
Mm.
me, I create levels of comfort for myself, right? Trust me, there have been sales calls where I was not as charming and charismatic that I think I am. Like I've had some calls with some IT managers, and that is a tough nut to crack, right? Where I'll crack a joke and it's like, dead pause, awkward silence,
Crickets, yeah.
right? And but what I've been able to do is try to find that thing that connects me to them. And it could be something as simple as, hey, what games are you playing, right? Or what did you like? What sports are you into? Or what are your favorite, your bands, or your favorite, what album are you listening to? What book are you reading? And I think if you start something very small, especially something that you may have interest and be passionate about as well, that's kind of the first olive branch, right? And
Mm.
I really think that what drives a meaningful conversation, it's different when it's someone who knows you better than yourself, and it's a totally different situation when this person doesn't know you from Adam. And I think from a sales lens, for me, I try to always be myself, because at the end of the day, that it is who I am, right? So
It's the
even if
only
I
person
face
you could be.
rejection, right, who else am I going to be? And I also think, you have to really kind of you have to be honest, right? You have to
Mm.
give them this no BS kind of you have to have this no BS mentality, and you really want to make sure that you're setting proper expectations, right? So one of the biggest things that I faced early in my career was talking about price sucks. It's an awkward conversation. You almost feel like, oh man, I really hope they value me at what I think I'm worth, right? But eventually those conversations became easier because I one understood what we were worth and I understood what our value was, but I also communicated it in a way that was just honest, right? Hey, you need this for your business. If you do not have this, here are the risks you're taking. And it's
Mm.
okay to say no, but just be aware of your risks. And I think if you can lay that out for the client, you can let them make that business decision. At least you've done your part where you've been transparent. Where we mess up and I've made this mistake, we try to save them a dollar. We don't fully explain what the risks are. We tell them, but we don't really explain it and we don't set the right expectations. And then when that bad thing that we knew was going to happen happens, now they're ready to place blame on us, or they get amnesia and they forgot we talked about it. And, there's ways to do that in a very just direct and communicative way.
Yeah, that thing you just mentioned about trying to save them a dollar is something that it keeps coming back in these conversations a lot, because I feel like just about every MSP has gone through a bit of this interesting evolution of being the person that's trying to, the hero complex. I want to save my customers money. And it is no surprise why like 31% of MSPs, according to Service Leadership, actually lose money. And it's because they're not thinking in terms of running a business. And I think it's a very, I guess, honorable thing to feel, but maybe it's not the best thing for the business. And then I had this interesting conversation with Paul Dipple a few years ago, and he talks about how some of the happiest clients are the ones that are paying more money to MSPs, and those are the ones that are the most profitable, of course. And then in turn, the clients are spending more money because they're happier. So it's an interesting sort of cycle of once you sort of turn that corner of like realizing, well, I don't know if I can run a business at these sort of thin margins or trying to save the customer money, and we get us outside of maybe that discomfort of whatever thing we're putting onto the idea of money. Because I find even I went through a bit of this evolution. I think I had old ideas and things about money that I was kind of superimposing on my clients, and I was my own worst enemy in a bit of that evolution. And so
Oh
this is
yeah, I
kind of
mean,
to our
yeah,
topic of
that's
change. I'm sure you went through a
yeah.
bit of this yourself.
Oh yeah, I mean it's so funny because I'm still going through that change myself, right? So like when I first started, I was 26, 27 years old in this business, and I'm 40 today. So the Antwine of 27, had a totally different mentality. I didn't have to put really a dollar value on my time because
Mm,
I was going to outwork you no matter what. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm the hardest working guy in the room, right? Or, my mentality might have been more of, okay, it's me against Big Blue, it's me against those bigger MSPs, and I'm going to always win no matter what it takes, whether it's winning on price or just winning on work ethic. But, as you get older, I'm 40 now. I have a wife, I have two kids, and my whole priorities in life have changed. And it's so funny because I saw this preview with an MSP I'd met early in my career. And I remember, what he said to me. And I was like, this guy's crazy. He said, hey, man, at the end of the day, I just want a business where I can spend time with my family. And I'm thinking to myself, forget that. Show me the bag. I want to make as much money as I can. Right. But then you start to learn things like not every dollar is a good dollar. Right. You also start to win. You learn things like, do I want to win on price or do I want to win on value? And, I think the best advice I would go back and tell my younger self is you have to begin with the end in mind because, yes, you are a one man show and profitability is different with a one man company than $1 million company, than a 2 million or 3 million or 5 million. And you almost have to begin with the end in mind, not necessarily pricing per se at the way you are if you are a 3 or 5 or $10 million company, but you want to be able to scale to that way. And as
mm,
resistant as I can be to some of the different frameworks and methodologies that a lot of people in the channel have, one thing is pretty consistent. It does come down to math, right? It is a math problem at the end of the day on what you're spending and what you're making. And I think that a lot of MSPs have to understand that, yes, and we all do it, I do it. We give away so much for nothing, and
mm.
then when this client outgrows us or leaves us or moves on, we take it so personally because we're like, I can't believe it. You stole from me. You left me when I gave you my soul, right? And at the end of the day, that client's not wrong for leaving. It's a business decision. So you too have to have that same mentality, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the moment you unlock that, it changes everything. You can it's about your value. That's what matters. Price is your price. Price is irrelevant. It's the value you bring and what technology problems are you solving for those customers or end users.
Man, you're hitting on so many points here because I feel like we romanticize a lot of this idea of like, oh, I didn't get into this business to like build it for sale. Um, but there's so much good information and best practices around how to run a profitable MSP, and I think people kind of conflate the idea of profitable with immoral. Maybe is the best way I can describe it. And so there's this like people are at a clash with themselves over this for years until they realize I just can't run a profitable business, and they're not mutually exclusive. Like you don't have to run a profitable business and also not have time with your family. Like those things don't have to happen in parallel. And so it's so cool to see that this mentality has taken a good front seat in your operation for
And
sure.
the other thing that kind of really started to really bring it home for me was because I was the same way. I said, hey, if I can take home a decent paycheck and the team that supports me and believes in me can take home a decent paycheck, then profitability doesn't matter if I'm not selling. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? Because profitability unlocks options. It unlocks the ability to do more for those people that you
Mm.
so eagerly care about and you want to defend and help. I mean, without profitability, you'll never give raises. Without profitability, you'll never give those bonuses. Without profitability, you'll never bring in another employees whose life you're going to probably change for the better, right? And so for me, I took it more on if I'm not charging what I should be charging, then I'm doing the people that believed in me that are part of this journey a disservice. The people that are really putting in the work, the guys that are answering, the gals that are answering the phone, the people that are on the front line getting the heat from the client. I'm not a good leader for them if I am not making those right decisions for the
All right.
overall good of the
So I'm
company.
I'm gonna get real for a second because you sound like the billionaires that say follow your passion. It's easy to say, and they've forgotten about the entire history and the backstory of when it was the times were tough. And so I don't know if maybe I can pluck a memory out of when it wasn't like this for you, and you're going through a bit of the transition, or what your thought process was on the change, or what was sort of the factor that really got you thinking, you know what? It's like when your wife says, if you're going to chase your dream, if I'm gonna support you on my nurse salary, I need you to go chase your dream, and those are the things that kind of light a fire under your behind, right? So I'm curious if there was a time when it wasn't as obvious or simple to explain as it is now.
So you're saying just in the context of, was there a time where I wasn't really this driven or motivated or trying to kind of push
Sure.
us to the next level?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
Or,
mean,
or even your attitude on pricing, or even your attitude on profitability, right? There's I think we go through so many changes and evolutions as we grow the business.
yeah. So it's funny because like when I was thinking about leading up to even COVID, we were just trying to survive, right? We're just trying to get these tickets closed. We're just trying not to lose clients. And we're trying to gain clients any way possible, right? New logo clients, new logo clients. And I think the thing that really kind of tipped me over was when I got a chance to see, like, the Kevin Demganis of the world, right? Or some of these other MSPs that were doing it just at a way better level, that had went and walked in my shoes and already said, hey, man, I can already tell you the end of this movie if you don't want to go through some of these hard times. So that was like one of the first unlocking moments. And then I think the second unlock moment for me was when I lost a client. So we had this client that the relationship was ironclad, right? We loved them, they loved us. And the reason why they left was honestly because we didn't charge them enough, right?
Hmm.
Because and to him, they were a company that really were involved in the private equity space. So the fact that we weren't charging market value showed our lack of maturity, which scared them because they said, "Hey, we're on this trajectory to become a 500, $1 billion company. How can we believe in your
Hmm.
company if you can't even, charge the right price, right seat price?" And I think that that's why, going back to what you said earlier, a lot of people find that the clients that pay more, they understand your value, those clients will stay with you forever. Those clients will love you forever because they understand that you are a mature organization. And for me, my mentality, even in college, was always fake it till you make it, right? Perception's reality, right? But at some point, you have to start living that reality. At some point, you have to become that perception. And that's been kind of part of the journey. And that's the thing that's motivated me, is that, you know, not having a plan or a goal, you're just running, you're just sprinting, right? But having that plan and a goal, there's a destination, there's an end to the means, and that's really where it really changed for me as we started to set some goals. We wanted to have some plans. Now it's
Hmm.
not about me, it's about my family. Now it's not about me, it's about, my chief operating officer, Chris's family. And that's what really turned it for me because I love the people. I care about the people more than anything. And that's a no BS thing for me.
I love it. I love it. I think there's also the flip side of like the evolution our own clients are going through, because as MSPs, and I think we see the whole gamut of clients. The 5 seat client, the 20 seat client, the 100 seat client, and we're kind of like catering to manage all levels of relationships across the various sizes of clients. And so like even driving a bit of this change for clients is super interesting, because like you can even the own change that we're experiencing, we can see the writing on the wall as our clients are starting to experience it. And somehow, if you haven't sort of dug deep on the relationship, they just won't listen to you on this stuff. And it's fascinating to me, like how we are supposed to be the agents of change, especially now that we rely so much on technology. But somehow clients just, put up this wall, and it's super difficult to sort of get across that message. And so I was curious to ask you a bit of, your relationship with clients as far as this being a technology change agent, and getting them to think about, how do I, think 5 years ahead in terms of leveraging technology successfully and so on. Because, it's a dynamic for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us honestly have experienced this with the recent and even less recent cyber attacks and the hacks, right?
Mm.
And I think the media coverage of this really made that conversation a lot easier to have than it was 10 years ago. So before trying to get someone to buy a firewall, you felt like you were pulling teeth a decade ago. and then trying to get someone to get antivirus, and then to get from antivirus to EDR, and then manage SOC and all these other things that are part of the security conversation, it was always like you felt like you were this, door-to-door salesman trying to sell them a vacuum cleaner. And when a lot of these breaches happened, and people started to actually pay attention to news, I think a lot of your customers started to understand, hey, it can also happen to us. But that's not enough, right? So in order to kind of be that administrator of change, you have to share with them real stories, because trust me, we all know someone has been ransomware. We all know a client that didn't listen, that didn't have the backup, and they lost everything. So what I've done is I've done that through the art of storytelling, right? So for a lot of things, whether it's my story, whether it's one of my fellow MSP stories, I've retold that story, but it has to be the story that connects with your client. If your client's a dentist that traditionally they don't like to spend a
Yeah.
ton of
There needs
money,
to be a thread. There needs to be a thread of connectivity for sure.
100%. Because guess what? At the end of the day, they will always say in the back of their mind, it cannot happen to them until it does. And I think, once again, it goes back to setting realistic expectation. Now, here's the thing. There's always going to be a barrier, and the barrier usually is cost. But I think for the client, you have to get them to understand that this cost isn't an expense. There's actually an ROI on it, and it's the continuity of their business, right? And it should be treated as if it's power. If it's gas or water, if they're a restaurant, it's the fuel that keeps their business going. And I think more MSPs have to evangelize it. I think the MSPs that make the mistakes I did in the past, that say, what, let's just get it down to the cheapest price and let's make maybe 10% margin on it, they're not helping the industry, right? They're actually part of the problem, right? Because in a lot of ways, what happens is those MSPs don't have the financial resources to invest in the next level of technology, or to invest in the things that keep the client safe. And that's how we usually prop it up when we talk to clients. I say, look, this is a two-way investment. If we don't earn margin on it, or if we're not doing it at the right price, then how can I invest in the next level of technology that protects you?
Yeah.
This
Any
industry
innovation.
is constantly
Yeah.
changing,
Yeah.
To be cutting edge, you have to stay sharp. And that's part of the business that we've all chosen to be a part of.
And by the way, on the ROI bit, I love this conversation. I think it was Matt Lee who positioned it this way, because I think the whole cybersecurity era kind of changed a bit of the conversation. If you're smart enough to sort of tag on to this ideal, which is, I think no matter what area of the business it's in, business owners tend to be like, well, what's the ROI on that spend, right? And I think technology and IT is no different than that. But the cybersecurity landscape has changed that entirely. Now the option of not spending on that is to potentially lose a couple $100,000, $500,000 in a breach situation. So imagine if you're starting at negative dollars and the objective is to have $0 of loss. That's already the ROI. And so I
Correct.
remember this other MSP that told the story of like how he'd come into boardroom meetings. Had a little binder of like breach newspaper articles of companies that got taken, for hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, whatever. And it was a simple story. It's like, my job is to keep you out of this book. And I that always stuck with me. It was so impactful. Like, I just still remember it to this day so clearly. And I could see how the storytelling is just a critical
And
thing for clients to
like
get it.
we shoulder, quite a bit as being MSPs, like it's so crazy because the barrier of entry for an MSP is zero, right? You just have to get customers, right? We're
Oh,
not like
but
an
you
electric.
immediately own all the risk in
Correct.
that situation, and I think we're kind of blind and ignorant to it for so long. And so, anyway, sorry to
It's
interrupt.
mind-boggling, right? Because I mean, the electrician that ran the outlet in my office, right? That guy, well, we hope should have been licensed, right? And that there's no barrier of entry for MSPs, which I can argue pros and cons of that, but I think at least as ourselves, one of the things even Matt Lee talks about is we have to have some type of accountability, right? Whether it's through us holding ourselves to a standard through a
Mm,
framework, whether it's CIS controls, right, or SOC. But, I think that when we are talking to our customers, they also have to understand that, right? That, look, I've been in the business for a long time, but that still doesn't deem me an expert. What deems me an expert is this journey that I've been on, right? Is the experience that I bring to the table, and is the investment that we are making into ourselves and as well as into bringing you in as a client. Because, like you said, we take on all the risk. Our lives could be diminished by a supply chain breach. That's a risk we love to take, or even by our own, errors, because we're human, right?
Well, and in this landscape, the other word that Matt uses a lot that I think is so important, and it's defensibility. And it's easy to conflate with washing your hands of the situation or saying to a client, "Oh, well, we don't want to be accountable." And couldn't be farther from the truth. I think it's really about making it very clear what the risks are, having the client understand the risks in a way that they can make a business level decision about it, but also understanding that everything is always rosy until it isn't, and when it isn't, guess who's going to get that letter from the lawyers? Yeah, the MSP is. And so I think we have to get more preemptive about those situations. And again, defensibility isn't bad. It's just part of the evolution that this is the situation we find ourselves in today. Wow, this is a deep topic too, by the way, because I feel like we resist a lot of this change for so long. Clients resist the change. What do you think is this resistance? Like, we know we have to do it. Like, the compliance landscape is really interesting. Like, almost like, I mean, everybody's just waiting until they're forced legally to have to do something until they do it, even though we all pretty much would agree that this is the right way to do it and that we should all be compliant and that there should be some controls and processes. But like,
Yeah.
why don't we have them yet?
So, I think with, us, right, we're always kind of, in this, a lot of us are caught in working in the business and not on the business, right? So
Yeah.
we're just, like I said, we're playing this survivor game, right? Survive to the next day, survive to the next problem, the next task. So a lot of times what happens is we don't have the resources to invest in a stakeholder in our company to own compliance, right? Or we don't have the resources and money to invest in a platform, that can actually manage the compliance as a service or the tool, right? And I think, for us to be these kind of the ability to adapt, right? If you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not adapting, you're dying. Or to be these agents of change, I think a lot of it starts within, right? And then I think for us, we have to be willing to kind of do that let going of the vine or let going of the things that are holding us anchored to the business. Guess what? I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert in compliance. So maybe I should bring in a resource or maybe I should use a platform. Having those honest and open conversations. Because the one problem, like I think, a lot of us as MSPs have is we have this like superhero godlike complex, right?
Mm.
Trust me, we can figure out anything. But is that the most efficient thing for the business? Is that going to be the thing that gets us to the next level? Is that the thing that is scalable? I always talk about, this next gen or next evolutionary MSP is not your father's MSP, right? It's the MSP that can be nimble. It's the MSP that can be open-minded. It's the MSP that can pivot, that can adapt to the changing of the tides. And you're right, the resistance is always going to be there. And I think a lot of us are very scared to get out of our comfort zone. That's part of the reason why, too, a lot of us haven't really dove into the AI, even though it's a hot, fancy, cool, shiny buzzword in a lot of ways. A lot of us haven't really started to leverage that as the opportunity until we're forced to, right? But when you're forced, it's kind of like you're late to the party. It's too late. So I think for MSPs that are trying to be forward thinking or evolutionary or innovative, we have to stop. And this is another problem we have in our space is we have to stop letting the tools prop up our offering, right? Guess what? Everybody offers RMM. Everybody offers EDR and SOC and
Yeah.
all these other tools. The value isn't the tools. The value is what are you bringing to the table as the company, whether it's compliance as a service, VCIO, really great help desk in some capacity, but even that's becoming more commoditized. And I think that the moment you kind of think at that level is the moment that becomes the agent of change.
Hmm. So, in the spectrum of challenges that we have growing businesses, what's something that you are actively, disassembling right now? A problem that you are fascinated with, so to speak.
Yeah, so I mean, everybody's talked about, the whole concept and complexities of AI. Some of the things we're thinking about more on the security side are some of the deep fakes, right? Like these robocalls. And it's funny, I literally just got one of these yesterday where I got a robocall, sounded like my nephew. 100% sounded like him, right? And I really thought these things weren't going to happen until I of course, saw the news article. I was like, okay, we're years from that. But we actually got one of these robocalls where it was my nephew's voice, sounded like some major accident or happened and he needed something. Well, luckily I'm wise enough to send a text message to his actual number. And then he said, no, what are you talking about? But those are the type of things that make me very nervous, especially if they can take this podcast and use AI to re-engineer my voice and call my client to say, hey, so-and-so, you are locked out of your, we need to shut things down right now. There's an attack. I need all your passwords, right? They're going to give them to me because, I have that relationship of trust. So that is what the next thing we're really trying to untangle and unpack is putting in the correct safeguards to prevent something like that from happening.
Mm.
I would also go to say that, the reason why, a lot of these incidents occur is because we are creatures of convenience, right? And because we are creatures of convenience and we want to do things that are easy, we typically open ourselves up to this risk of being hacked or experiencing a breach. Trust me, I'm very guilty of it. There are many platforms out there where I am using that same old password from college, and I'll go on the record and say that. Now, luckily, I keep church and state separate, right? But I do think that we have to become more aware and then also more vigilant, on those things. So.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of a bit of the survivor approach is something that's I think very real for a lot of MSPs because we're always a little bit behind the eight ball. Even the much more large and profitable MSPs, they're always sort of chasing something that they can't get in front of or ahead of. And I think one of the challenges or pitfalls of that, of course, is it leaves little time for innovation. It leaves little time for education and learning. A little time for developing your teams and growing, as people, as teams. And so, what are some of your maybe hacks or strategies to short circuit that and be able to make sure you're spending the necessary time on these things?
Yeah. So, it's tough, right? Because you're right. Like we said, we're in the survival mode, and you're worried about the problem of today, and not really thinking about how do you prepare for the problem next week, right? So one thing as a business owner that really helped me was so I have the worst time management in the universe. I finally have started to own that, and one of the things I started to do was I started saying, okay, look, these times or these hours are going to be dedicated to Antwine's leadership development, or these time and hours are going to be dedicated to Antwine taking care of these things. And it's almost like office hours where someone cannot knock on my door. They cannot say, hey, quick question. Quick questions typically are not very quick
I
in
know,
our
yeah, the
office.
context switching is so painful. Yeah.
So what I've done is I've actually personally, I give myself that time. The other thing that I've learned to do, especially with like our employees is, we take a day, like we'll take a day, like typically Fridays, right? And each employee has a different day where they can take that day. Because, a lot of us as business owners, we always want to tell people, hey, you should pick up, Azure or these other different skills on your own free time, because when you're working for me, you're just so enthralled and excited that you're going to want to do this when you go home, right? That's very unrealistic. I used to do that all the time. What we started doing was we actually started devoting in-house office time for people's development, right? So I'd say, hey, get this certification. Here are 2 hours a week in the office or remote that is company time that you can take towards that self-development. And that has really turned the knot. I guess that's actually moved the needle for us because now people would rather do that than perhaps maybe deal with some of these tickets. We don't do it where everybody's doing it at the same time, but
Of
that has
course.
allowed for a lot of people to actually up their skills and get better. The other thing I've done too is during our meetings, we'll set kind of like 1 hour with me where it may be something that's a knowledge transfer, or it could even be something where, hey, I've encountered this problem 100,000 times. Let me show you how I would solve it. And I think that that's really helped us grow as a team. It also builds a better cohesive relationship because now, as I tell everybody, look, we're all stronger together, right? And I can't be the most knowledgeable person in the company because we will never get to the moon that way, right? We'll never scale and grow that way. And I think that now that people are starting to understand that and you're giving people the ability to grow and take ownership, here's the thing. It's not going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes, but if you don't empower them to make the mistakes, they will never grow.
Yeah,
And
the
that's the
empowerment.
hardest thing going.
Yeah, the empowerment's so key. I think in that learning, and there's this critical part of being an MSP, which is doing projects, for example, just to pick on a topic or an area of revenue of the business. I think when we first start, projects are super exciting. Because it's something new, it's new technology. It's often where we get to tinker with the new things that we hadn't sold or implemented before, and so there, I can see why projects are exciting for project engineers to do. But I think also when we're in early stages of building an MSP, like projects are incredibly inefficient. We have no idea how to scope work. We have no idea how to price any of that. And so I was curious, after a number of years of running a shop, what are maybe one or two of the sort of golden project nuggets that you've learned, that you would give some
Oh
advice
yeah.
on?
So one of the biggest mistakes I would always make when pricing a project is I would price it from the perspective of if I did the project and everything went perfectly. Myself and Chris, we have fallen victim for this so many times, but then we forget. Well, that second project comes in that needs our attention, and then we have to assign that to someone else on our team. Or you have a situation where a general contractor is running behind schedule, right? So you have all these variables that you honestly have no control over. So what we try to do is, at least in the scoping, we account for those now. So we tell the client, hey, it is going to be more expensive based on these unforeseen variables that we, from our experience, probably are going to encounter. And we also give this client kind of a bit of comfort, right? Because we'll say, hey, it's going to be more of a project range than maybe a specific price.
Yeah, you
It
anchor
could
it.
be as high
Hmm.
as this. And that's really helped us a lot because very rarely do we ever have to bring it back down to what we say initially. Usually we're within that scope or range. The other thing that I would say with, the projects, they are very exciting. One of the things that I really challenge a lot of my peers to do is, you know, whatever you start, make sure you finish, right? And we have a
Hmm.
very, constant thing of getting distracted by the next shiny thing, right? For me, it's
I
tools.
know.
I want the next shiny thing.
Undocumented. The end of the project
Right.
doesn't get documented. Just the
Oh,
handover
yes.
doesn't complete. There's just so
Handover
many little
doesn't
pitfalls.
complete.
Yeah.
And it's all about communication and synergy. And I think for us, what we've learned is when you're doing a project, I always tell that person that's in the weeds of the project, treat it as if you have to support it every day, or treat it as if you don't want to ever have to come back out here again. So make
Hmm.
sure you over document. Make sure you spend the time to communicate to the team that you're going to be handing this off to support it, that they are well equipped to do what they need to do, or all you're going to do is burn up cash going back and forth between a site. And it's hard, especially with us. We do stuff out of state. Like we're doing a project in Hawaii for a client. And yeah, we don't have a big margin of error. We go back, we're in the negative, right? So just due to the cost of travel. So what we try to do is we try to be very realistic with ourselves and realistic with the clients, especially on budget and costs.
Hmm. I think another thing that we don't start doing with projects until much later is KPIs as an example. And
Yep.
in the larger vein of KPIs, I wanted to ask you in the style of like how it started and how it's going. What were some KPIs that maybe you were thinking about 13 years ago, and maybe some different KPIs that you now realize are not the vanity ones and are the things that are actually are helping you drive the growth of the business?
Oh man, this is good. So 13 years ago, when it came to KPIs, and I was going to think of a funny acronym, I got nothing. KP what is what I would have said, right? The only thing I cared about was the money moving from their account into my account, because I didn't know any better, right? I just thought if cash was coming in and I could make payroll and there was a little money left over, we must be doing great. As we got mature, and we started to learn things and we became parts of different peer groups, we started to realize, oh wow, there's this thing called net profit, right? So for us, I think, the biggest one that's been a driver, at least more so recently for us, has been what is our, and it's not just margin, right? What is the burden cost of client acquisition? What is the burden cost of supporting a client? And then, the other piece is when it comes to like tying it back to projects, is every project worth it, right? Um,
Hmm.
like, if you have a project that's going to take 4 hours, what is the number for that project to be a profitable project? Because the problem is we have a hard time saying no and turning things down, right? Because we feel like if we say no, we've missed an opportunity. There are ways you can say no and you'll get a second chance to bat. One way you can say no is maybe passing that work to a trusted partner, right? Because at the end of the day, you were the source that got them to where they needed to get to. Or sometimes saying no could just mean, okay, let me hook you up with this vendor directly, right? You're still a resource.
Yeah.
And I think that was the biggest thing that I've learned today is to say more of no's to things, not necessarily that aren't profitable, but maybe they're just not in our wheelhouse, right? Or maybe we don't have the manpower to support it today. And that's been hard. That's been very tough because I like to
I need
accept every opportunity.
I need to double click on that for a sec, because is it a no, or is it a yes? And here's the guardrails that we need this yes to be in, and how are you moving the client into that? Maybe you're having to let them go away and think about it and come back, to your I guess requirements or conditions for the yes. But maybe just explain a little bit further
Yeah,
on the
sure.
no.
So, for example, if there was a project, let's say with Microsoft Copilot, right, that a client was very passionate about getting accomplished, right? It is a skill set I would not have today. So, what I would ask is, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? Because I still want to understand the scope, right? And then the next thing I would do is try to find the right resource that can help them along their journey. But one of the things that I try to do is when it's something that's like out of our wheelhouse, perfect example, we still want them to understand what the cost is, right? Because that usually will dictate a lot of things for the client. Because a lot of times, we have these great, brilliant, and very ambitious ideas until we see what the price tag is on it, right?
Mhm.
So then it becomes less of an urgent business need. So that's something that we try to at least figure out on the front end. Now, for projects like, okay, we just have too many projects in our pipeline. I usually try to leverage one of my MSP partners, right? I try to find that trusted resource, and I'll say, you know, hey Donald, this project right here, I know your MSP can take care of it. I trust you. We've worked together. Would you mind taking care of this on behalf of us for a client? And sometimes, yes, we can. It's an opportunity for us to make a little money on it, and then other times it's not. It's more of just a warm handoff, right? Because that's a better fit for him. But at the end of the day, we're still doing a service by connecting them, being that trusted advisor, right? Because they came to us because they trust us. But
Yeah.
you have to be willing to say no on certain things, especially if it's not going to move you to the next level. Even Kevin's taught me that on certain different things that were business models in his MSP 10 years ago that are no longer business models today, even though they still generate great revenue, right? It's knowing when something is no longer part of it. Well, it's part of the evolution of change, right? Like at one point in our career, we were going to your house fixing your PC, and then we realized that was no longer something that, as the evolution of Initech has had, we wanted to do anymore. It doesn't mean that we told everybody, good luck, figure it out. It just means we partnered with them with someone else that was in that part of their journey.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting evolution that happens, because you talked about it. You said, the fake it till you make it, I think, is a difficult habit to break. And even our industry got started a bit this way, right? The MSP or the VAR days of, like, client raises their hand, says, hey, we need this product. It's like, I've never heard of that before, but I'll figure it out. And if I can make the 5, 10 points, 15 points of margin, I'm going to go ahead and sell that. And so I think this sort of has maybe been some baggage that we've brought along, even in big things like a co-pilot deployment. It's like, oh, we're not going to do compliance until our clients raise a hand, and then we'll go figure out compliance
Right.
so we can get paid at the same time for learning basically on the job. And I think for something, it's obviously the wrong approach. And so kudos for finding the spots where
It's
this is
it's hard,
not
trust me, and it's
well,
a, it's an everyday journey. And like
and
the
I
funny thing you were saying about the whole VAR thing, right? Like, you're right. A lot of us still kind of have that VAR-like mentality. I mean, look at the different tools that we leverage in our stack. We like I said, we try to prop our MSP on that. One of the
mm,
cool things I will say, about like, when we were at Connect, right, and there was this announcement about the, Kaseya 365, right? That's putting a lot of pressure on some MSPs, right? Because now those tools, whether they're from one ecosystem or another, can't can't be the only part of your offering, right? There has to be more to it than that. And I think now we are kind of going to see this agency of change, because we are now going to be forced to be bigger than our tool stack, right?
mm,
And yes, I do understand that a lot of the stuff that we have in our ecosystem, yes, essentially we are reselling it, but the tool is not what makes the MSP. It's the value, whether it's that VCIO, that trusted advisor, that occasional weekend therapist for that other business owner that just wants to confide in you, right? But and once again, it starts with the relationship, right? And it starts with building those connections. Those connections, I promise you, will supersede anything, any price point, any tool can bring to the market.
On this occasional therapist idea, I feel like there's an interesting transition that MSPs they want to be in the boardroom. They want to be sort of literally part of the C-suite of the customer, and we're not really brought into that level of meeting at the client level. And so we're kind of at our own mercy, like we're our own bottleneck there. It's like we don't want the weekend calls, but we want to be in the boardroom. It's like, well,
Yeah,
you can't have your cake and eat it too. And
exactly.
I feel like there was this MSP I was talking to a few weeks ago, Joe Markert. He came on. He was telling me I don't want to be in every boardroom meeting. Like that. That is probably there's some walls there that clients like to keep a little bit of church and state and all that stuff. But he does ask clients to bring him into one of their annual planning meetings, for example. And it changes the dynamic entirely because now this is their agenda, it's their content. And he wants to hear, like, how can we bring technology into your bigger thinking and planning and strategizing? And I thought that was brilliant. Like, it never occurred to me to say to the client, hey, bring me into one of your annual strategic meetings, for example. And it was the complete opposite. It was us trying to beg the client for 5 minutes of their time to pitch them on the next project at the next QBR, right? So I think the tides are definitely changing. We're starting to see a bit of that interesting sort of
Yeah, and I
shift.
think with that, you're also kind of building that deeper connection with the customer, right? And now you become part of that budgeting and forecasting committee, or at least, and I think for us, a lot of us are afraid to play the long game, when it comes to the relationships we
Mm,
have with our clients. Just because they don't buy from me today doesn't mean they buy from me a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 2 years from now. And I think getting opportunities like that, or at least asking for opportunities like that to be a, because we've done that before too, where we've asked to be part of those bigger strategic meetings where, yes, 98% of the meeting has nothing to do with technology, but at least it gives you a better lens of their business and it makes you a stronger advisor to that.
I would probably have a hard time getting an MSP to tell me, oh, we've never had a client tell us they were opening an office in 2 weeks. I think we've all gone through those surprise announcements, and it's because we were missing from some of those things. And so something's got to give. I guess is my point.
For
But
sure.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh man, this is there's so many potential little rabbit holes for us to get into on this conversation, and I think technology evolution and adapting to change. You talked about AI sort of being this place where you're kind of spending a lot of time trying to disassemble a bit of what your process is going to be going forward. What are maybe a couple other things that you've been thinking about? Maybe the long game. Speaking of the long game, that you think we got to start thinking about this now and not wait until we're sort of behind the eight ball potentially.
Yeah, so and even going back to some of the stuff on AI, we're also trying to figure out how do we incorporate it into our day-to-day business operations and function, right? For
Mm,
us, it's about more efficiency. Like it's so funny because I always think we are just so dysfunctional as an organization, and then I get to talk to many of my MSP friends, and we share the same plights, right? We say we all like culturally, share like the same challenges. It's almost like that communal, that it's almost like that communal mindset a lot of people have growing up where you didn't have all this technology connecting you, but we all, experienced this pop cultural movement or this pop cultural thing.
mm,
It's same in the same MSP realm as well, where we all kind of share this trauma as MSPs from whether it's
that's so
abuse from
true.
our clients or not charging enough. But what we're trying to do is become a more efficient organization. And a lot of that's through process, right? A lot of that's through leveraging technologies that's going to, help move the needle for efficiency. Some of that is moving to a specific platform and using the power of integrations, right, to help leverage that growth and change. Partnering with companies like ScalePad or Kaseya and figuring out how do you make it a true partnership and not just someone you buy stuff from, right? And I think that for us, what we're trying to get to next is leveraging relationships, yes, with our customers, but also the partners or vendors that we buy from, right? And one of my big initiatives right now is because I become a graveyard for tools because I go to so many conferences. Sell me your next best tool. Cool. That sounds great. Let me buy that and sit it on the shelf because I don't have time to onboard it. So
Mm,
one of the challenges we're doing now is taking all those tools, putting them into our stack, integrating them, adopting them, and then putting them under the microscope of, okay, is this really moving the needle for our business, right? Is this particular solution, how is it impacting the business? Not because we can sell it, right? That part's kind of the easy part, but can we adopt it and make the techs more efficient in their day to day? Are the techs buying in on this solution, right? Or is it just another tool that I shove down their throats? So
Yeah.
yeah, so those are some of the things we're working on. Those are some of the challenges I'm trying to overcome because for me it's all about correcting some of the wrongs of the past because when I started I didn't know any better, and honestly I didn't have time to do it slowly because we had to immediately get to market. We had to start making money. We had to start paying bills. So
Um, Final thought, and maybe your sociology background can give us some insight on this, but this happens a lot in our personal lives. You hear parents say, "Oh yeah, no, the kids will always need to make their own mistakes. They'll learn from their own mistakes. They'll never listen to us." And I feel like in the MSP space, you see a lot of that too. You see MSPs coming in at all levels of the spectrum of growth and maturity, and it's like they've never heard any of the shit we've been talking about for years before, and they just go in and do all the same things, and then just they go through their own transition. And now that you're sort of at this stage where you wouldn't call yourself a brand new MSP, but maybe you have all these goals and aspirations for where you want to go at the next level. Do you feel that you're more receptive to other people's shortcuts and advice, or do you feel that you're still going to end up going through a bit of your own mistakes as you transition through some of the next phases and pivots?
oh yeah, this is oh man, it's good. So I think for a lot of us, including myself, where there's still this level of hard headedness, right? Because we were able to get to this point
On
doing
our
it the way
own,
that
yeah.
we've done it.
Mm.
But what we don't understand is that, to certain levels and scales in the business, sometimes you have to change the way that you do things, the tools that you use, even down to the customers you have, hell, even the people that help get you to this point in order to break through that next barrier. And I think that that is one of the hardest things as a business owner we will eventually encounter. Anybody that's been through like an EOS or, some of these different frameworks and platforms, they eventually kind of wake up and say, wow, how do I get everybody rowing in the same direction? Man, I got to make some tough personnel changes. But remember, it goes back to this whole thing as being a human and being an MSP is we have these deep ties and relationships with people, right? So a lot of times the thing that's helping us grow and change is holding on to maybe these not so great or not so mutually beneficial relationships. And I think for us and for me, the biggest thing that I think that I'm trying to achieve personally is making sure that I make meaningful relationships with the correct people at this stage in my life, right?
Mm.
And being okay with just being honest and saying no.
Man, what a great idea and thought. It sounds like a great thing to ponder for the rest of the year. It's like, am I a little relationship health check across the board to make sure you're not steering yourself off the right track.
Hey, people
Um,
take from your bucket and they got to be able to put stuff in too. And it's
that's
hard, let
true.
me tell you, because I'm like everybody's friend because I love people, man. And even I have to kind of take a step back sometimes and say, okay, you know, the time I'm giving to this, could I be giving this time to someone who really needs or can really grow? I talk to a lot of MSPs. I mentor some MSPs. The one thing I will tell MSPs is don't hesitate to ask questions. Like I used to be the guy that would always you'd say some crazy acronym. I'd be like, yeah, 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 Chat GPT XYZ. Yep, yep, I know that because I don't look like a fool or
Ooh,
not knowledgeable.
whoa.
But I think it's okay to be humble. It's okay to be vulnerable because not knowing sometimes is the key to knowing, right? And the key to growth. So
Yeah, I love that. Man, so many great insights. Thank you so much for coming to hang
yeah,
out for a few minutes and shooting the breeze. Everybody, this is Antwine Jackson of Anytech, based out of the Raleigh area. So good to see you, man. I hope I get to see you at one of the upcoming conferences again, and we'll have a
I'll
a
be
little
there.
chat. All right. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can catch all our previous conversations and episodes at mspconfidential.com or on the ScalePad YouTube channel. We're also live streaming here on LinkedIn, as well as Facebook and my Twitter, and everywhere I can send a thing, I'll send the thing. So come check us out. We'll be back next Friday with another guest. Antwine, thanks so much. Until next
Thank you.
time, have a great rest of your Friday, and we'll see you soon.